to Geared for Growth. I'm your host, Mike Mortlock from MCG Quantity Surveyors. Today I've got the wonderful Rhiannon Jenkins, and we're talking about how to make sure that you're not chasing your tail when it comes to purchasing a property. So she gives us some guidance and some industry insights into how to frame the type of property that you're looking at, how to create a buyer brief, as it were. We also talk about the many steps involved in getting to that point, and also ways that buyers can put themselves in the box seat, because often an offer can be really more about the terms than the price. Of course, the price is often the biggest component, but you can actually secure a property by making sure you massage those terms to suit the vendor as well. So we talk about getting purchase ready, and we talk about some of the reasons why you might be looking for a property for a long period of time and what you can do about that. It's a really great interview with Rhiannon, which I'm sure you're going to get some value out of. Here's Rhiannon. Rhiannon Jenkins, thanks for joining me on Geared for Growth.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
I nearly forgot the name of the show there. It's just the sort of professional interview you could expect us to be having. Now, I've been looking forward to having you on the show, and we're going to talk, I suppose, high level, the buying process. The topic of the show is how to avoid chasing your tail when it comes to purchasing a property. Now, the first point that we sort of talked about off air is basically deciding what you're trying to buy. Now, that sounds very, very simple, but I hear from buyers agents all the time that there's a buyer brief, and then keeping the buyer to stay within the confines of what they already agreed can be quite a task sometimes.
Yes, definitely. And sometimes, that brief can change because you really have to be in the market and experience it for yourself to really understand what it is that is going to work for you as a home to live in or an investment property. So it can change, but part of our job is to talk to the buyer and say, this is the brief, this is the parameters that we're working within. Do we need to change any of these elements, or is there a bit of emotion that's creeping in?
Mm. Now, it begs the question, and I'm going to try and come up with a clunky metaphor and see if I can bash it into shape. When we're using a graphic designer to design something for our business, and they say, what do you want it to look like? I sort of fall down and have no idea. And get to the point where if you could just give me 3 examples, I'll tell you what I like. Now, is that a workable metaphor for people that are looking at purchasing a property? Because I guess they know what they like when they're in the property and they can see it, but is it hard for them to define on paper?
Absolutely. I think that's a good metaphor to use, because similarly, we'll ask our clients, what have you missed out on? What are some examples of properties that you've been looking at? And then they'll send us the address of those properties, and then we actually get a really good insight into what it is that they're looking for. Of course, if it's from an investment perspective, we're going to ask a little bit those deeper questions around capital growth and yield requirements. So yes, sometimes they say, I really like this, and that's great. That's what they like, but what do they actually need and require in a property as well? Are a bit of different conversations. But yes, getting an insight into what they have seen or what they've missed out on so far is a really good indicator of what they're trying to achieve.
Mm. And typically when people sit down and they are describing this property, would it be things like X amount of bedrooms, these suburbs, a car park or a driveway or something? Is that typically what people come to you as, or do they say, this sold on realestate.com, last year and we want that?
There's a bit of both. So we definitely get the scenarios where they would say, I've missed out on this and I'd really like to replicate this, and we can absolutely work with that. But if we're sort of starting from scratch, the first and foremost is understanding the budget and what are the parameters that we're working with in terms of the budget. And then we look at, the minimum criteria, which is the bedrooms, bathrooms, car, location, and anything that's really important to them or important within that particular area in terms of tenant demand as well is really important. So we have that conversation up front. Usually, before they're a client as well, we're just discussing the options and understanding what it is that they're hoping to achieve. So there's a variety of different clients. Some will really have a clear picture of what they want and what they require, and others are really starting from scratch and need a bit of help fleshing that out.
Mm. And speaking specifically to property investors, I suppose it's a less emotional thing. They might not necessarily even go and look at the property themselves. When they have an idea about, I want to get an investment property, do they typically have a budget and an area, or do they typically look at the things that are important for investment, such as vacancy rates and such as the demand for that type of property from tenants?
In my experience, people have typically already had location and type of property already decided. And then we work into the finer details of what that looks like. And we will go into the information around vacancy rates and what makes those particular suburbs, a good choice versus a suburb that's a little bit further out or further in. And it's just looking at the various compromises or the trade-offs that can be made as well. But yes, typically people will have that location and property type in mind.
Yeah. And what about the disparity between the buying process from, say, a buyer's agent to your average investor? Are investors on the same page of, okay, step 1 is to do this and step 2, and we don't think about step 8 till we've done 5 and 6? Is there a clear process for you, and is that a sort of a point where you need to get the investor on board with you?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure. I guess people would have their own processes and ways of approaching things. We do have a process, but it will differ depending on every property and the negotiation. There's multiple factors that are involved, and we guide them through each of those property scenarios or negotiation styles. But we will have that process, and there's various things that we tick off as we go and educate the buyer on what needs to be done at what time. A lot of buyers maybe just, they find a property themselves and then work backwards of what's required. But with our experience, we know the order of events that we need to work towards, and we take the buyer along that process with us.
Yeah. And okay, so let's say we've shortlisted something and we've done the due diligence, which presumably is part of the process. And the buyer is saying, okay, well, everything's stacking up, all the reports, the pest and building, and we've checked the zoning and the caveats or whatever it is you buyer's agent people do. How do we make sure that they're in a position to put themselves in the front running to actually be the purchaser of that property? If it ticks all the boxes, how do we give them the best chance of actually securing it?
Yes, it's a good question around positioning the buyer. So yes, if they've done all of their due diligence, it's about having a conversation with the agent in particular around their particular process and their vendor's requirements, and also the buyer pool on that particular property as well. So this conversation actually starts right from the beginning of once we are calling the agents and finding those properties for the client. It really starts at that point, and we may know the agent and their style and how they work. And then through the campaign, we get to understand the vendor's motivations and requirements, and, possibly the other buyers as well. We'll know that from the competition that surrounds the property as well. What are the comparable sales? What did they achieve? That's all a part of the due diligence as well. Mm-hmm. So it's really getting clear on what the opportunity is in terms of that property itself, and what's the price point as well that's expected, that's required to secure it, and assessing that pricing as a part of the due diligence as well.
And I suppose the pricing, it seems obvious that whoever's got the most money to spend is going to get the property, but that's not always true, right? Because the offer has nuances to it over and above the actual price. So you can secure a property for cheaper than someone else with that positioning, right?
Yes, correct. So it's all about timing. Timing is super important. So if you understand what the steps are involved up front, you can get ready very early on. And that's coupled with staying close to the selling agent and talking to them about what needs to happen. Is it private treaty? Is it an auction campaign? Understanding the timeline that they and their vendor are working with, and then making sure that you are ready as early as possible, because it can provide you with more of a competitive advantage. And you're right, it's not always price. It can be terms and timing.
Yeah. And when you compare someone that has done this process properly, now obviously if you're working with a buyer's agent, they're going to make sure that you're not going to get to the last moment and go, "Oh, what? You don't have finance approved?" That'd be a rookie error. But what are some of the rookie errors of people that perhaps are looking for an investment? They haven't had a lot of experience buying property, that you're able to sort of swoop in and make them look like amateurs and have less of a chance of actually securing the property that we could learn from.
I think it's understanding the market that you're operating in as well, because if you understand the properties that are selling around you, the types of agents who are very strong in that area as well, understanding, the volume of listings as well, how many properties are selling in that area that match the brief and requirements. So it's all of this context that you already have going into the process. And the regular buyer has to start that from scratch. And that's an education and learning process for them. And they might need to go out, inspect, and build up their relationships with the selling agents. Whereas a lot of the time we start with that as the baseline, is understanding the market, understanding who the agents are, and the process that you need to work through. So we already start ahead of the regular buyer.
And there's a lot of people that have told me that they've had anecdotal evidence to say agent A loves buyer's agents. Agent C's had awful experiences with buyer's agents. I guess it depends where around the country, and you're in Sydney, which is probably the buyer's agent capital of the world, maybe, or at least people are much more used to it. How typically do agents respond when you introduce yourself as a buyer's agent? The Geared for Growth Property Investing podcast is presented by our business, MCG Quantity Surveyors. If you're an investor or a property professional looking to get the best tax depreciation deductions for yourself or your clients, please get in touch with us at mcgqs.com.au. It's our mission to help as many property investors as we can to maximise their claims and maximise their property education as well.
I think it depends how you introduce yourself and how you build and continue that relationship with them. And typically I found selling agents good to work with because I'm asking the questions up front and understanding how they like to work. And sometimes that might not suit our requirements or our buyers' needs. And that's okay. You work with it or you find the next best opportunity. Yep. So I think it's just asking as many questions as you can at the right time and checking in with the agent, not on a daily basis, if you're searching, but it might be a weekly check-in or something like this. But I found selling agents, yes, to be good to work with, and you sort of have that colleague to colleague level as well, because as buyers agents, we obviously represent the buying side, sellers agents represent the selling side, so we just operate on that playing field.
And if you come across somebody that has an agent that has a bit of a prejudice against buyer's agent, so let's say we're talking about a property investor that has a buyer's agent working on their behalf, some of the stories that you hear are things like an agent might say, look, this one we haven't signed the deal on yet, but it's coming up here, and I know you got a buyer looking in that area. I've heard about buyer's agents sort of mentioning that to other sales agents who then go and knock on the door and try and steal the listing. Are these typical things that tend to happen in the world, or these are those sort of 1 in 1,000 examples that if that happens to an agent, they just decide to hate all buyer's agents by proxy of that?
Well, I haven't really come across that, to be honest. So, yeah, I'm not sure about those scenarios, but you might get selling agents that, treat buyers agents, similar to any other buyer, and might not have enough time to talk to you at a particular time, whatever that may be. But I've had pretty, just general transactions with selling agents, and I haven't had any issues. There may be issues out there, but I'm not too sure.
Yeah. Obviously, you're playing in a nice neighborhood. I think there might be some dirt out there. So, what about the people that you're working with, or perhaps investors that are looking for themselves, and they've been looking for a long time? They've found opportunities, they haven't been able to do the negotiation. I know myself. I get to the point where I'm like, I've just had enough looking, so I'm going to relax my standards and just buy something, which is, in all honesty, an awful approach. But what advice do you have for people that are looking long term and are struggling?
Yes. So if a buyer's been looking, say for 12 months plus, what I would suggest is, it can be a confronting scenario because there's a mismatch or an issue there. Why haven't you bought if that is your goal and that's what you've been actively working towards? So what I would suggest is actually looking at past sales history. So going on to realestate.com or Domain and actually plugging in all of your criteria and then having a look how many properties have sold within your budget, within your criteria in the past 12 months. Because that can, be a confronting number. If there's only a few that have sold in the past 12 months, well, it seems like there could be a mismatch. So then it's about getting very honest with yourself and going, okay, what about my criteria isn't matching? Is it my budget? Is it the type of property is not really available in the areas that I want to purchase? So it can be any number of those elements, but actually looking at the sales history and the data can reveal clues as to why, you're not purchasing within your budget and your criteria. And I think if there are lots of properties that have sold well within your budget and your criteria, the questions that the buyer could ask themselves are, what are my obstacles? What are the things that are actually preventing me from buying if it is in fact my goal to buy? So it's being very honest and saying, what's the missing link? What's the challenge here that I'm facing? If it's been a long period of time and I'm willing to take action, but it just hasn't happened. So it's about being honest with yourself and seeing where the issue may be.
That's a very difficult exercise at the best of time, like looking at yourself in the mirror and going, what are you about, right? When it comes to buyers that, you put all the effort into finding a property that perfectly matches their brief. Do you often find that people are just nervous about pulling the trigger? Is there something kind of innate in a lot of people where it's like, okay, well, I was so focused on finding something and that seemed like it was never going to happen. Now that I've got it, I actually am a little bit paralyzed by it?
Yes, potentially it could be somebody that is nervous. And I would ask, what about that process, what about that property makes you nervous? And pinpointing that, because chances are somebody could help you with that particular element. It's asking all those people that are in your property team around you, asking them as many questions as you need. Because if you're not comfortable, you're not confident with the process, pinpointing where and what makes you nervous about it, and then finding the right person who's the professional in that area to help you along or provide you with some guidance or some answers.
And if an investor has got to that point and they're looking at a property for themselves, I mean, where do they turn? Like they've done the research, they know the type of property that they want, they've seen something in their budget, but they just they've got a little bit of a block, or they're just worried about it, or they're wanting a bit of a backup. I mean, is that something that buyers agents can help with piecemeal? Is there research out there? Are there tips and ways that people can get across the line and actually get that property?
Yes, absolutely. So if a buyer's found a particular property, but they're not really sure what to do next, then buyers agents we definitely do offer a service where we evaluate that particular property and negotiate on their behalf. So definitely the buyer's agent side of things is definitely a service to turn to. The buyer might want to call a few different buyer's agents that are local and specific to their area. and just say that they have a property, they're not really sure what to do next or what the steps are. Do you have a service that can accommodate my needs for this particular property?
Yep.
Or if you don't have one that you want to pursue, you could still ask the question and say, look, I'm comfortable and I have time to do my own researching and searching, but once I've found it, can you help me there?
Yep.
So yes, I'd definitely be asking around buyers agents in your area who are licensed and can help you.
License is very important. There are plenty of ways that you can run the research on that online. So if we could bookend this by talking about the bookend means front and back. If we can back end this, I just realized that didn't work. My metaphor
that's okay.
Before,
I didn't notice. It's fine.
Yeah, I probably didn't need to mention it, and we are still recording. Let's finish this by talking about the let's say the best 3 tips that you've got for someone in getting that transaction done, because we're talking about getting frazzled, going around in circles, not being decisive. What does the person need to do to make sure that if the time is right for them and they want to purchase this type of property, that they get in there and they get it happening?
Yes. So my top 3, number 1 is goal setting. So understanding why you're purchasing this property, how does it fit into the bigger picture for you, and what are you hoping this property can achieve for you?
Yep.
And then number 2 is getting really clear on that brief. So even if you think you know what you're looking for at a high level, get very clear on your must-haves and your nice-to-haves. So there's going to be 2 sections, the things that you won't compromise on and the things that you will if it does come down to it. Number 3 is having your team around you. So having all of those property experts, so having a property lawyer or your conveyancer, having a strategic mortgage broker, your accountant, financial planner, having that full team, and of course a buyer's agent if that's a part of your process as well. And asking as many questions as you can. You want to make the unknowns known. So just ask all of the questions. And even if you're not sure if that particular person can help you, just say, I need help in this area. Can you direct me to the right person? Yep. So don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, it's okay to admit that you're a human and you might not do this every day. Buyer's agents can sometimes take for granted, I guess. Rhiannon, that's a very, very good insight into how to get focused and how to be decisive and how to make sure that if you've found the right thing in the right place in the right budget to actually go and pull the trigger and start your portfolio off or continue building it. So thank you very much for sharing all of those tips today.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Cheers.